All right, politics in the Gilded Age. This would be considered the post-Reconstruction era, and you're probably wondering, what does Gilded Age mean? What does it stand for? Why was it called the Gilded Age? So, Gilded Age means covered in a thin layer of gold, and the reason that this time period was called the Gilded Age was because many, including Mark Twain, believed that there was a thin, glittering layer of gold or prosperity that covered the poverty, the corruption of most of society. And so when he's saying, and again, this concept was kind of coming from Mark Twain, when he's saying a thin but glittering layer of prosperity or gold, he's kind of referring to American industrialists and the wealth that they had accumulated, and how that wealth helped hide the problems that were faced by immigrants, laborers, farmers, and that it also helped to cover up the widespread abuse of power in business and government during this time period. So one specific example of corruption would be with the Credit Mobler scandal in 1872. So what happened here? The Union Pacific Railroad received government funding to build the Transcontinental Railroad. So the Union Pacific then contracted with Credit Mobler. Now, typically in this situation, various construction companies would have the opportunity to be contracted for the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad. But in this case, the Credit Mobler, a construction company, kind of just swooped in and took it. Again, various construction companies were allowed to kind of bid on the construction of it, and Credit Mobler just took the job. Now, understand that Credit Mobler was made up of several stockholders of the Union Pacific Railroad to build the actual track. So Credit Mobler then overcharged Union Pacific for the work they did, who then overcharged Congress, and U.S. government paid nearly twice the actual cost of the project. This money was then pocketed and used to bribe government officials when investigation began. This was the largest scandal in U.S. history and led to greater public awareness of government corruption. So, again, in this specific example, we see the Union Pacific Railroad. It needs to be built. And so the government decides to fund it. Now, obviously there are several stockholders that are a part of the Union Pacific Railroad that have invested in it. They decide to form this construction company, Credit Mobler, and in doing so, they take the job, they charge an obscene amount for the work, because Congress said they'd pay for it, and then Credit Mobler is paid for their work, which is actually the several stockholders of the Union Pacific Railroad. And they've charged an obscene amount, way more than they needed to. And so all that extra money just falls right back into the hands of the several stockholders of the Union Pacific Railroad. So very sneaky. Very sneaky, and again, a very good example of corruption during this time. All right, another example. The spoils system. Corruption reached national politics. For decades, presidents had given jobs to loyal party workers in what was called the spoils system. As a result, some of the workers were not qualified for their jobs. So basically what we saw happen here is elected officials appointed their friends, their supporters, to government jobs, no matter whether they were qualified for the job or not. And oftentimes, these jobs were high-paying, but required little to no work. And both parties actually use the spoils system. And again, it's going to lead to a lot of corruption. and it's also going to lead to an ineffective government. You know, because obviously when you have people in positions high up that are not qualified to be there and don't know what they're doing, it's not going to lead to a government that works well. All right, Hayes and Garfield. So Rutherford B. Hayes, he took some steps to reform federal government, and this angered some members of his own party. He was a Republican, and he refuses to use the patronage system, which again was the spoil system where you just give your friends positions, to work for you. Instead, he made it a point to make sure that he only hired qualified political independents to cabinet posts, and he fired employees who were not needed. By these actions, Hayes began to reform civil service, which is just government workers, or the government's non-elected workers. He continued reforms without congressional backing and decided that he probably should go ahead and not run for a second term because his chances of winning were not great. James Garfield, he favored the reform movement as well, and he was actually shot and killed by an unbalanced stalwart. A stalwart was a person who opposed any changes. So in this particular case, Garfield was elected president, and the vice president was named Chester A. Arthur, a New York stalwart. And again, stalwarts in this particular case defended the spoil system. They believed in it, and it's very possible that this stalwart probably favored Arthur over Garfield, and that was his whole point in doing this. So Garfield, again, was shot by a stalwart. Arthur became president. Some historians, though, do believe that this particular stalwart was denied a job by Garfield, and that's actually why he shot him, and that it actually didn't specifically have anything to do directly with the spoil system. So Garfield was shot, just a little detail, 4 months after being president. All right, Pendleton's Civil Service Act. So Garfield's successor, Chester Arthur, pushed through the Pendleton Act of 1883. And the Pendleton Act of 1883 created the Civil Service Commission to give government jobs based on merit and not politics. So give jobs based on whether they're actually qualified for the position or whether they're not qualified for the position. Stop giving jobs to your friends because it leads to an ineffective government. This act also created a Civil Service Commission, which classified government jobs, tested applicants' fitness for them. It also stated that federal employees could not be required to contribute to campaign funds and could not be fired for political reasonings. All right, issue of the tariff. In the 1888 presidential campaign, Harrison versus Cleveland, there was a large focus on tariffs. Tariffs are just taxes on imported goods. Now, Harrison, a Republican, he wanted it high. He wanted a high tariff, and he wanted to cut foreign competition with this high tariff. So again, this is a tax on imported goods. So if foreigners are importing goods into the U.S., they're going to have to pay an additional tax in order to do that. Cleveland, a Democratic, he favored low tariffs. So he didn't want to cut foreign competition. He almost, in an indirect way, wanted to encourage it. And so he favored low tariffs or low taxes for foreign competition or foreign companies who were bringing in goods. So it's also important here that you understand the difference between Republicans and Democrats during this time. So most of the Republicans during this time were big business workers, big business owners, bankers, Eastern farmers, mostly in the North and upper Midwest. And so it made sense that they would want to put a high tariff in place that would limit foreign competition because they didn't want foreign competition. They wanted their business to be the one and only, so that they could be more profitable. Where the Democratic Party during this time was made up of urban immigrants, laborers, southern planters, western farmers, and so it would make sense that they would actually want lower tariffs because many of these farmers were getting their machinery from foreign companies, and so if those foreign companies have to pay a tariff on this manufactured good or piece of machinery, then they're going to have to charge more for the farmer as well. And so, again, the farmer is going to be out profits. So this was a big debate. And Grover Cleveland ended up winning. All right, so what are political machines? Large populations in the city and clashing interests provided an opportunity for a new political force, the political machine, and this was typically controlled by a boss. A machine was a group that controlled a political party by giving voters services they needed. The machine won their votes and controlled city government. Craft, this was when businesses or individuals who wanted a favor from the city could get it by paying money to the machine. This was, again, called graft, and it was a major source of income for political machines. Now, in this part here, when I say by giving voters services they needed in exchange for votes, I'm just referring to potentially jobs or contracts to residents of their ward, do favors for them, any way in which they could receive their votes. And so we saw this happen a lot with immigrants who were really struggling and really needed some help, and so they would, kind of reach out to, the political machine or the boss that controlled that political machine, to get help to get a job or pay off a debt. And then in exchange, they would promise to vote in favor of whoever that boss wanted them to. We also saw election fraud during this time. So when there was not enough votes, many turned to election fraud using fake names or dead people, which casted hundreds of false votes. So what did the city boss control of these political machines? They controlled the city government, jobs of police, fire, and sanitation departments, city agencies that granted licenses to businesses, and money was used to fund large construction projects. They controlled, more specifically, thousands of city jobs, also controlled business licenses and inspections, as well as the courts. The boss did help the city by giving money to the hospital and other city needs. Political machines could point to many accomplishments. As they gained power, though, some individuals became corrupt. Some used illegal methods to win elections, as we saw in the previous slide. Others abused power to become wealthy. Since the bosses controlled the police, they were seldom pursued. The Tweed Ring of New York was one of the most famous examples of corruption, and he's pictured there to the right. Boss Tweed and many associates were finally convicted of various crimes. So Boss Tweed, his real name was William Tweed, and he was head of Tammany Hall in New York City's powerful Democratic political machine. One of Boss Tweed's schemes was the construction of New York City Courthouse. Cost charged to city $13 million, and the actual cost was only $3 million. He was arrested on 120 counts of fraud and extortion. He was sentenced to 12 years, but was reduced to 1 year. And then he was arrested after his release for other charges and escaped while serving his